Hello and welcome to the DocArena Podcast in association with Film Ireland. My name is Whitaker, and every fortnight or so I talk to documentary makers about their films, both in terms of the subjects they choose and the way in which they fund, craft and distribute their work. In this episode I discuss Ransom 79 with director Colm Quinn. The film follows veteran journalist Charlie Bird as he battles the debilitating effects of motor neurone disease while trying to break one final story in the time he has left. The ransom refers to the £5 million demanded by an anonymous gang who threatened to otherwise release a devastating disease that will wipe out Ireland's livestock and upend the country's economy. It's an unknown case and untold story, and in this gripping documentary, beloved reporter Bird and his friend playwright Colin Murphy set out to solve the mystery. The film is directed by Colm Quinn, previously the director of Mattress Men, who has a brilliant handle on story structure and observational documentary making. Here's a taste of the film, followed by my chat with the filmmaker Colm Quinn.
I'm working with Charlie Bird on a case from 1979.
Dear Minister, this is a demand for £5 million.
It was always the position that ransoms would not be paid.
Charlie, there was mayhem in the country. You would remember it, you were there.
The less people that knew about it, the better.
This is a cat and mouse game being played.
What does this story mean to you? It's keeping me alive.
Colm, thanks a million for joining me. Could you start off by giving us a bit of a summary of the film?
Yeah, Ransom 79, it focuses on the journalist Charlie Bird as he tries to investigate a story that's been kept secret for, over 40 years. And this is while he's dealing with the effects of motor neurone disease. So the story he investigates with his friend and collaborator Colin Murphy it looks at a series of letters that were sent to the Department of Agriculture over 8 months between 79 and 1980 that threatened to release foot and mouth disease on the country. And over the course of that 8 months, sort of a game of cat and mouse starts to unfold between the gang sending the letters and the guards who are communicating with them via the personal ad section in the Irish Times. So as each letter comes in, the demands become more and more outrageous. So that's the overall picture, really.
Why do you think Charlie was so interested in this particular story?
I think there was a couple of reasons. I think it's because the story unfolds in sort of like a period like that were sort of Charlie's formative years. And I think there was also just the fact that he hadn't heard a damn thing about it. You know, it was like I think he was nearly annoyed he hadn't heard anything about it before this, you know, and because it's just so utterly outrageous. And, you know, you'd think you would have maybe heard somebody muttering something about it somewhere, but he hadn't heard a thing. And that just really kind of piqued his interest. Charlie is like a dog with a bone, and just got dug into it, and just couldn't let it go. You know, it was one of those things. Like, obviously he did the podcast on it, but I think he had a real sense that it could work as a doc, and I think he was right. You know, it was that, like, I think that it needed probably a bit more research, which for the documentary to fly. But I mean, essentially that's what the doc becomes. You know, it's like it's watching Charlie and Colin do that research and interview the people, and you know, like we're watching sort of like a live investigation unfold. You know, so it's fascinating that way. You know, like it's sort of we were discovering things along the way, and I think that was the gas part about it. You know, because you're kind of hoping that then translates to the audience. You know, just that sense of kind of happening upon new information and learning new things, and that's something we wanted to try and get across, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I mean, obviously, if people have seen your previous brilliant documentary, Mattress Men, it's very much an unfolding story. Is that something that attracted you to this, that you would be able to tell it in that way?
Yeah, you're right, Ross. Yeah, there's crossovers for sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that sort of long form observational approach is something that certainly really kind of appeals to me. I guess you just get this real kind of sense of time passing and life unfolding. And yeah, I mean, I suppose that has certain kind of implications for how you approach the production piece too, in terms of, you're likely sort of editing simultaneously to filming, but that's really interesting too, because you're sort of like when you edit a piece of footage together, that sort of can then inform, you might learn stuff from that in turn can inform your approach for the next piece you're filming, or where kind of gaps in the overall kind of narrative might be, or just interesting places that the story can go. But I think it's that thing of and I suppose similar to Mattress Men is that sort of two-hander dynamic between two people. Sort of there's a similar kind of I guess there's a similarity there to some degree, albeit very very different type of relationship. But yeah, I think just that dynamic between Colin and Charlie is just I think that was the thing. Like when we saw that sort of on camera for the first time, when they were interacting and discussing the story, it was just so interesting, and there was just this lovely sort of dynamic that's both, professional, is that a word? Professional and amicable, and amicable all at once. Professional. I think we've just invented a word there.
That's it. The Germans probably have it already, but
exactly. Yeah, yeah. So it's yeah, there's just a very kind of particular energy that Colin and Charlie had together, and there was a real sense that, okay, this would be a lovely thing to try and document the two boys going after this story, so yeah, no, it's definitely an approach that appeals to me for sure.
Yeah, and I suppose it's such, for me as an audience member, I suppose, like, I find it so satisfying to actually see a story happen in front of the camera rather than be retrospective. And then it takes a certain kind of discipline almost, I suppose, to try and maintain that approach throughout, and not give yourself kind of easy ways out through interviews, and ensure that you have the scenes you need to keep moving the stories along, and to keep it making sense. How do you kind of approach that, or what's your thinking on how best to make that work?
Yeah, you're right. It's hard, all right. It's like this weird sort of Zen documentary approach, where you've just got to be extremely present for for as much as possible. And I actually think that's the hardest thing in documentary, just to be there, to be present. And I guess it's even like a logistical thing, like there's only so much filming you can afford, and there's only so much time you can be out. And obviously this project posed particular challenges as well. I mean, Charlie's health and well-being was the most important part, and we had to be very kind of flexible in our approach, So I mean, there were certain days where we had crew booked, and like there were certain days we'd do the full days, and then there were other days where Charlie just wasn't feeling as up to it, and we would maybe shoot a bit less and then have to figure something else to shoot. So you need kind of like a backup plan, or yourself, Ross, like something can happen then at the drop of a hat, and you've just got to run out the door with a camera and a mic and just go get it. If you can, if you can rejig things, So it's a very sort of it's a real kind of agile approach for sure, But I think from a documentary point of view, like the rewards are so great to be able to try and maintain that. Now it's sort of like, I know we can't all be on call all the time and stuff, and I think there are certainly aspects that you would have in any project where you're like, God, it would have been great to be there for that moment or this moment, or God, how did we miss that, or But I think if you can give yourself the best chance to sort of to be there, when you just have a sense that something significant is going to happen. And I think maybe what sort of narrows down the focus a little bit would be the sort of like the structural elements involved, I guess. Like, I mean, is this going to be a moment where, like, our protagonist is going to encounter a significant obstacle in the pursuit of their objective? If that's something that you can sort of anticipate is going to come up, then it's sort of like, okay, well, we can take a fairly strong punt with a crew on this, maybe, that we could get something quite strong, so that maybe comes back to an overall kind of sense of just what the structural approach is to the piece, like, just like, yourself, like the nuts and bolts, like, who's your protagonist, what's the objective, what's the struggle, those sort of pieces. So I think once you kind of have those sort of in play from early on, then that makes it easier, I think, in terms of identifying where those sort of great observational moments might actually take place, you know. But yeah, it's hard to be to be on call for all of it, for sure.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because, you know, you're using terms that are there that are quite typical of screenwriting. And I know you've written as well. And it's funny, I've been asked in the past by people, you know, if you're making an observational documentary, to just go out and film everything and figure it out later. But you really are trying to stay in the moment, as you say, aren't you? And think about that structure as you go along. And then when you then approach a scene itself, like you're there on the day with a camera, how are you kind of thinking about how you're going to make this a scene? Like, do you have an idea of, like, I always get certain types of shots, and that kind of thing, like establishing things in a particular way, knowing when a scene is over. What's your thoughts on that?
It's an interesting one. I guess there was on this project there were different approaches. You know, I mean, there were certain scenes where it was just me and a camera shooting coverage, and I think you know, in that sense, you have kind of a sense of what the scene is going to be about. So, I mean, I think on the most basic level, you're trying to get as much coverage as you can, just that it will cut. You know, that when you're just giving it to an editor, that you've just got your bases covered. But I suppose, like in that sort of thing too, you know, there's kind of like maybe an intuitive piece going on as well, where you're listening closely to what's being said, and you're trying to be sort of as responsive as you can to that. And sometimes you might get that, and there's other times you won't. You know what I mean? So it's just about trying to listen as intently as possible, I think, to what's unfolding, and just to kind of move with the scene accordingly. I think, you know, I mean, there was other days where we shot with two cameras, and I think in that sense, again, you do kind of have an idea of what's going to be covered, but I guess it's just trying to shoot it in such a way that still allows it to feel as organic as possible, you know, because I think sometimes with two cameras, you know, if it gets too much into kind of like shot reverse shot, then it starts to feel a bit kind of like too staged, and that might just take the audience out of it a little bit, you know. But, or if you're in the flow of a story, it might not either. But I think there's ways you can sort of like dirty it up a bit too, in terms of like that shooting approach, you know. And Kevin Minogue, the director of photography on this, was, you know, he's very intuitive in terms of how he covers the scene. He shoots great coverage, but he also has a really good sense of what's happening in it, you know. And we'd have discussed in advance, look, this is maybe what's going to happen, but then if something else entirely happens, you know, he's very responsive in that sense too. And it's a very particular skill, and like from Kevin's point of view too, like it's like he shot all our reconstructions too. So I mean, there's just like incredible versatility there in terms of being like a documentary cinematographer, where you can go and shoot these like really stylized reconstructions, like with a big crew, and then the next day you can be ready to go and shoot an observational scene and have that sort of intuitive piece going on. And like I think Kev has done a bit of work as an editor over the years as well, you know. So I mean, he has that sensibility of how a scene might cut, which just helps enormously, you know. But yeah, and I suppose the last piece in it is that, you know, you've only got a finite amount of time in the edit too, and like when you're giving your material to your editor, like you know, you're going to come in with a struct, like a paper edit of some sort, you know. Now, like that could evolve considerably, but there has to be something in terms of like a framework, I think, you know, to work around. And I think that was something that kind of emerged, and I suppose in a way that the story on this allowed for that maybe to emerge more clearly, in that there was this investigative element taking place. Now, we didn't know exactly where the investigation was going to go, but we had a certain sense of like what bases might be covered along the way. Yeah, and I think that's there. You know, there's a certain sort of degree of resolution that comes about. I think on the investigative side, and I think there was, I guess the challenge was just trying to find that balance between the investigative piece and the, you know, the present tense piece in terms of, you know, Charlie's health and the challenges he was facing.
Yeah, it's interesting because, you know, the story unfolds with this series of letters, threats that this gang are going to unload foot and mouth on Irish agriculture and basically decimate the country. And we're sort of living that again in real time. But the style of the doc really feels like it has that sense of, I don't know, like that almost like investigative film sense, whatever that is, you know, a certain sense, you know, an energy in the camera work, a kind of, you know, it's almost like, you know, probably, you know, a style that you've seen in fictional films and so on and so forth, which are themselves borrowing from documentary to try and give a feel of something happening in real time. Was that something that you had to kind of work out with Kevin in terms of, yeah, we don't want this to be too perfect. We want a sense that this is happening in front of the camera, and we might actually be able to choose to put the camera on a tripod over here and get the kind of coverage, you know, that you might see in a particular type of kind of staged way. But we don't want it to feel like that, and we want it to feel a little bit like it has that kind of kinetic energy where we don't know what's going to happen next. Can you talk a little bit about getting that right and getting that kind of feeling into it?
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. Like it's that was a discussion that we had when I guess, I mean, this project went through kind of different phases in a way, you know, where at the outset, you know, we were shooting kind of material around a promo and whatnot, and like in that instance, we were shooting off tripod, where like Charlie did some interviews with Kevin Cassidy and Roy McComb, Four Goals, Willie McGee, and I guess as when Colin came into the project, we needed a different approach then, in a sense that you know, we knew this dynamic was emerging between Colin and Charlie, just individual scenes between themselves. But then when they went to meet people, we wanted to kind of keep that observational feel into those scenes as well, you know, to build that sense of kind of like a continuous sequence. Now sometimes we do break that rule, you know, in terms of I guess kind of keeping the narrative energy up, you know, and kind of cutting back to sort of different stylistic setups, you know, where it might be back to Kevin Cassidy or Four Goals, Willie McGee or whatever, you know, and it's more kind of, it's more structured. But yeah, I mean, it's exactly that. Like, I mean, the interviews with Jerry Collins, Bertie Ahern, Ray McSharry, like that was where we were at a moment where Colin and Charlie were very much sort of on the hunt of the story, and it was an interesting one too, because we were kind of figuring out what worked as we went. You know, it was like in terms of like there was a certain amount of kind of blocking in the scenes, you know, in terms of like where Colin and Charlie were placed and where the interviewees were placed, and you know, even how our two cameras were covering the scene, you know, and we kind of shifted things around a little bit. Like there's a couple of interviews where it's the lads sort of like sitting at a kitchen table, or sitting at a table, where the two boys are on one side and then the interviewee might be at the other, and we kind of shot it in a very kind of I won't say static, but it was much kind of clearer, you know. But then by the time we hit Ray McSharry, it's actually starting to feel much more kind of fluid, you know. And it's funny, like it's we were delighted with how we covered that scene. It just like was in a location that we hadn't seen before as well, so we sort of had to figure it all out. But I think that was the thing, we were kind of working together a few months at that stage, and like a shorthand was starting to develop about how to cover these interactions in a really kind of sort of kinetic or energetic type of way, you know. And like the handheld thing was certainly there from the start when we made that decision to shoot the interviews more like observational scenes than interviews as such. But I think we sort of figured out a way to make them even feel a little bit more organic again, you know. And again, that comes back to sort of, you know, maybe dirtying up the shots, you know, or like or finding something that just looks kind of interesting, you know, and yeah, I mean, I suppose there's the usual grammar applies as well, in terms of like we're in for the close up, you know, when there's a particular key bit happening, you know, you know, one of the big things in all this as well was Charlie's reactions were so brilliant throughout, you know. I mean, and they're a real sort of indicator to the audience as to just how deeply engaged he is in the story, and just how much he's taking from the process, with all of the you know, the challenges he's facing with the disease, you know, that he's getting this deep engagement from doing these interviews. And it was lovely to see him have those moments, you know. But also from an audience point of view, you're kind of looking at his reactions going, wow, like this is, you know, one of the most eminent journalists of the last 50 years who's like deeply engaged with what's going on in front of him. And like it just draws you in, you know. It's just great to see. So yeah, I mean, there was that sort of grammar applied as well, in terms of, you know, having sort of close-ups and stuff to kind of cover those moments. But again, I suppose it comes back to like Kevin was working with second camera. Donna was on second camera, and He's a brilliant shooter as well. Donna Fitzpatrick, the two of them together were just this brilliant team, and they have this sort of shorthand with each other. And yeah, I mean, I think that was the thing we all kind of grew into it to some degree in terms of like the best way to shoot scenes. And yeah, and there's a couple of scenes didn't make the cut as well, like you know yourself, that we were following other kind of story threads. And the thing was that they were at a moment as well where we've kind of really figured out what we were about in terms of the coverage, and it was awful to have to lose them, you know, because they just looked so well, you know, and like they're just brilliant moments in them, and they were great contributors. And but I suppose in the interests of you know keeping the narrative as lean as possible, it's we had to lose a few bits along the way, you know.
Just for people who may not be used to this kind of documentary parlance, what do you mean by dirtying up the shot?
Oh. I think that was one I picked up off Kev actually. Yeah, that would be like an object in the foreground. Like you know, if Charlie's sitting at the kitchen table at home working on his laptop, that we might have like a little bit of wall or something just at the edge of frame on the left, or like a bit of a chair that's just kind of creeping into frame or that sort of thing. And yeah, I guess it's just something in the foreground that's maybe like a little bit out of focus, or even like a little bit of movement, you know, that kind of uses an object that's sort of placed in the frame as something to sort of to shoot around almost, you know. So it just kind of it can be a little sort of just a nice way to kind of make things feel a little bit more sort of organic sort of thing, you know.
Yeah, it definitely gives it a certain kind of feeling, I think. And it's almost, it gives you more of a feeling maybe that you're witnessing something that's happening over, this has been set up with a bunch of cameras and everyone's performing in front of it.
Yeah, and I suppose exactly that, you know. I mean, it's I suppose that's the thing. Like we sort of live in a time where there's you know like reality as a genre, reality TV, reality, the genre of reality. You know, often in these types of shows, you know, they kind of like have this almost like stilted quality that's very you know, everything's kind of like perfectly framed and covered on about 25 cameras, and you know, the interactions can take place in a very heavily sort of expositional way sort of thing, you know. And I think you're trying to do as much as possible to take the edge off that aspect, you know, because it's something that kind of just has that. No, and don't get me wrong, this is like a hugely popular genre, and there's you know nothing wrong with it. But I mean, I think our approach in terms of like telling the story of two people on a journey, like doing an investigation or whatnot. I mean, I think the approach that we took just felt more natural in that regard, you know, like it just needed to have much more of an organic feel that was reflective of that very kind of natural relationship that Colm and Charlie had together. So it was just about shooting it in a way that was reflective of that both that relationship that exists between the two guys, but also the journey that they were on, you know.
A last kind of question about the camera side of it, but you know, you've shot a lot of stuff yourself over the years and to a very high level. What's it like for you then working with not just a camera person, you know, you mentioned a second camera and so on, and getting across what you want to happen? Because I think when you're used to shooting yourself, it's like, I don't know, you know, not to get too kind of highfalutin about it, but it's like you have the paintbrush in your hand and whatever you decide you want to do next, you can just do it. Whereas when you're working with someone else, there can be moments where you have to communicate something to them, and that can cause a delay in capturing what you want to capture. But there's also room for, I suppose, like a piece of communication to not lead to what you're actually hoping for. What's it like for you, I suppose, working with crew versus shooting stuff yourself?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. It's a tricky one, all right, for sure. Yeah, like I mean, I find shooting myself, it's you know, it's just more. It's like it's the physical act of shooting is almost, and you know, doing your damnedest to keep things in focus and not overexposed, and you know, making sure you're getting enough kind of coverage to get a scene. You are almost kind of like top of the list in a way, because I guess if you don't have those elements, then it's sort of, you just won't have anything, you won't have a scene that works at all. So it's almost like those absolute kind of basics when you're filming by yourself. If you can kind of get those, like if you can have a sense of just kind of getting coverage and I mean, it's tough. Like it's actually exhausting. I find it kind of exhausting shooting by myself, um, look, I'm very, very far away from being anything close to a director of photography. So I mean, like really, like I'm using a camera that's very as sort of user friendly and as versatile as it can be. That sort of that can kind of get the coverage to cut a scene. So I think in that sense, uh, I guess I suppose it's a couple of things. Like I mean, there have been times where I've just like turned up and filmed. I mean, like okay, who's going to be there. You don't quite have a sense of what's going to happen, but you're just there, and you're just like in a way you're almost like just hunting or fishing for material in a way. So it's kind of there's that, but then there's other times where you do have a kind of like good sense of what's going to happen, and I suppose it kind of depends on the location too. It's like just sort of like the type of role that's playing in the piece, and there's also the sound piece too. Because it's like generally what I do is I'll put a time mic, like if like for example, like I shoot on a C300 Mark II when I'm doing this type of thing, and I put I'd mount like an onboard shotgun microphone, and then would put a radio on one of the contributors, or who I think will be speaking the most. So you're getting coverage of the entire scene off the shotgun, but then you've kind of got a key voice covered as well within the scene. So generally it works. Like there's a couple of scenes in Ransom 79 that were shot that way, and they all work. So sometimes as well, like I mean that we did our post production, and like there was shots needed to be stabilized, there was shots needed to be sharpened, there was other shots that were overexposed, but I think what the key thing was there was coverage, like for the scene to work, and to feel like a scene that was observational. And I think it's just knowing yourself what the camera positions are in your own mind that you can move to and from when you're covering that scene. And it could be really simple. It might even just be one spot. Um, and yeah, it's just about just trying to cover those bases in terms of coverage in that instance. But I guess the second part of the question about the like when you're working with a crew in an observational sense, I think that's where you do need to have preparation done in terms of like the camera positions have been set up, like that like each of the cameras know what details they need to be covering, how they need to be covering them. If there's generally kind of freedom to kind of zoom in on a detail or not, or just to stay in a particular frame. So I mean, I think in that instance, as you say, sometimes if you are to give a direction in the middle of it all, then you can interrupt something that might be actually quite natural. And it's funny, like the camera does sort of like enter the ecosystem, and it becomes part of the ecosystem in a way. And that's a really interesting thing in and of itself. And I think when you're filming over a long period of time, it even more so becomes this embedded piece of the process, and just sort of allows for this kind of like naturalness, I think, to emerge.
It's just something that I think, as you say, I think the preparation is key for it, isn't it? It's I suppose getting the person that you're working with to understand what it is you are and are not interested in, and that they are then focused on making sure they get the things you do want and avoiding the things you don't, because it's the time spent getting things you don't want that's really wasted time. And you can be missing something important when you're filming the wrong thing. So getting people on track in terms of making sure that they know what you want and how you want it hopefully allows them to have a certain amount of freedom to then express themselves in adding something else to that.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that's really well put. Yeah, like you don't want to be sort of like too proscriptive in that sense. And that was the great thing about Kev and Donna. Like they have this very sort of intuitive thing with each other as well, in terms of how to kind of cover things. And you'd often see them like kind of, it could be like a glance, like their eyes would meet or whatever, and then, there might be like a nod towards a particular detail or something, and then like one of them might pick it up or whatever, So I mean, that was interesting to see how their process together worked as well, So it was yeah, and yeah, I think it's just about sort of trying to minimize the interruptions as much as possible, yeah, but at the same time having the like that discipline of kind of keeping things focused and on track and sort of like on point. And I suppose that's the thing, it's the balancing act, isn't it? Like sometimes spontaneous stuff can kind of rise within a scene too, that actually becomes quite interesting as well, and sort of allowing that to sort of emerge. But then if it's just kind of gone completely off track, it's just to kind of call it and get on to the next thing, So it's just being aware of that, I suppose.
Another element to this, obviously, is Charlie's declining health. And I think you'd worked with Charlie before, and I've also worked with him in the past. And he's such an interesting man, not just obviously a famous reporter, but very warm and enthusiastic and energetic guy. At the same time, you're filming him as his health is declining with motor neurone disease. And I think most people know that, unfortunately, the inevitable conclusion of motor neurone disease is that you really only have a few years to work with. What did you learn, I suppose, in the process of filming someone in declining health, in terms of, I suppose, filmmaking and other things? It must have been a strange and emotional process.
Yeah, Ross, it was difficult. Yeah, for sure. And it's been emotional. Yeah. And as you say, we've done 2 projects with Charlie now over the last 3 years. And yeah, like you do become close, like Charlie and Claire are friends. And it's difficult. Yeah. There's no question. It's difficult seeing someone suffer that way. And yeah, it's I suppose what the thing that sort of was heartening to see was just what Charlie was taking from the process itself, in terms of doing the interviews, doing the work, doing the research, working with Colin, going to shoots, all that stuff, that he was taking so much from that and just getting so much enjoyment and fulfillment from it. So that was sort of like a big sort of part of what kept us all going. And I think that the it comes up in the film a couple of times as well, in terms of like why are we filming this story, and that just so Charlie has that space to, just to get across why exactly it is that he wants to pursue this, and what exactly it means to him. And it was, I think, those moments are in the film, and it was, I think, important to capture that. But yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing. Like, I think something like MND is a very sort of, it's like, I suppose it can affect people differently, and in Charlie's case, it affected his voice more so than his mobility for the most part. And yeah, like it was, I suppose it was, I mean, all of us working with Charlie through that process, I mean, like I remember around the time that he was doing the samples for the voice bank, like I remember before he had lost his voice, like Brendan DC, our sound man, went out and just helped him to record like a series of phrases and stuff, and I think that was the thing. Like, it was really just sort of, we were doing what we could to sort of to help Charlie along through the process of doing the not just Ransom 79, but also Loud and Clear, But I suppose that was the thing about M&D. Like there was the physical decline, but like his sort of like his creative and his intellectual contribution was still there, and like we didn't really want to show his physical decline, like there's a scene towards the end of the film where like he is quite sick, and I was just talking to Claire about this yesterday, but this, like, he's actually luminous in it, like there's just this real gentleness around his eyes, and like there's a real, like, there's his beauty is in it, yeah, it's yeah, no, it was hard.
Yeah. Bringing us back to the film. I mean, I think it's. I mean, it must feel positive to have captured this. I think it's on a couple of levels. One, to see Charlie's tenacity, his professionalism, his absolute love of journalism, and to see that, him going after this last story. But I think it's also important for people to learn about motor neurone disease and how tough a disease that is, and how much attention needs to go into finding ways of ultimately hopefully curing it, but extending people's lives and so on. So that's actually not something we get to see on screen all that often. So I think if at times in the making of it you're wondering about it, I think ultimately now that you can see the finished product, hopefully it feels like something that was good and important to do.
Yeah, no, for sure, Ross, absolutely. Yeah, no, I think we did have that sort of sense of purpose, I think, in that regard, absolutely. And not just with Ransom 79, but also Charlie Bird Loud and Clear. And I mean, I think it's also kind of challenging taboos around both, illness and aging, that just because you receive a diagnosis, I mean, like, doesn't mean that your life can't still have moments of joy and meaning and fulfillment, and I think that's what Charlie gets across in this,
Moving back to kind of the filmmaking side of it, a couple other questions for you. Like, one is, I really, really thought that the graphical side of it was excellent, and it's such a big part of the film because, the story's unfolding through these letters and newspaper replies and so on. Can you talk to me a little bit about your approach to that? And, with there being so much in it, it feels like it'd be quite challenging to keep a handle on that and make sure you're getting that consistency and quality throughout.
Yeah. No, that was actually that we were working with a collective, like a group of people that I've been doing work with for years now across lots of different projects. But they're based out of Spain and Geneva. And like, again, this is another kind of remote element. Like, the film was edited remotely, and then all of the graphics work was done remotely as well. And I guess I've been working with these people for so long, there is that element of nearly like a shorthand there as well, so sort of, but I think that was the thing, like, there were elements in this story, like around the letters and the ads and, documents relating to the case, and that just had this like incredible texture to it, and from a design point of view, it just opened up so many possibilities. And obviously, like, the letters are kind of a key structural element too, that I suppose that bring up the tension of the investigation piece as well. We get this sense of like the stakes going up, pardon the pun, but it's there's other elements as well about the maps and the mini route and that sort of stuff, kind of just laying out as clearly as possible for the audience. Like, what I mean, I think that was the thing. The primary objective was sort of clarity, and if we could find like a stylistic consistency and something that worked within the overall energy of the piece, then we were sort of at the races, So yeah, it was. But yeah, I mean, I suppose that's the thing. It's kind of, we were like, in an ideal world, you would get to picture lock and you would have everything in place, and then you go to your graphics people and go, okay, we need this, and this. But obviously, with schedules being what they are, it doesn't work out quite like that, And you're working on stuff as you're still in rough cut mode, and then certain bits can still be discarded, and then other bits need to be tweaked, and so there was like a huge lift involved in terms of the graphics piece, and I guess just kind of coming up with an approach that would sort of like sit with the other elements that were in the story too. So it's kind of like there's a lot of kind of disparate elements in terms of like the observational piece and the reconstructions and then the graphics. I suppose it was trying to, like, we weren't kind of overly schematic, I guess, in terms of like an overall kind of approach. Like, it was kind of, again, everyone kind of brought in what they think could work, and we sort of built it out from there. And then as sequences were emerging, we were getting a sense of, okay, well, that graphic worked well there, or maybe not so much there, that sort of thing. But yeah, it's sort of like the stylized thing, kind of the graphics sat quite nicely with some of the black and white reconstruction pieces as well here and there too, So it was just the kind of, and there was a split screen kind of stuff as well, and the use of wipes across the screen and this sort of stuff, you know, it all kind of lent it sort of like a sort of particular energy, feel, and tone, you know. And I think there's almost like a certain levity as well to those moments, you know, where you're learning that the Mini can't go above 45 miles per hour, you know, and it's going to cover a particular route around, you know, the Midlands and stuff, you know. And it's just trying to kind of I guess just reflect those sort of those elements that you hope will sort of like impact on the audience in the clearest way, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really, really well made film. It's totally a credit to you, and all of those elements come together so well. It's fantastically done. I think I'm going to wrap it up there because I've used up loads of your time at this stage. Yeah, but thanks a million, Colm, and best of luck with the release. And I hope a lot of people come along to see Charlie's last story.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Look, we'd love it if people came out to see it, you know. So yeah, fingers crossed.
Thanks again to Colm for taking part in the interview. Ransom 79 is on release in selected cinemas right now, all over Ireland. Thanks to Stephen Galvin and Film Ireland for supporting the podcast, and to film composer Michael Fleming for kindly allowing me to steal his music. You can find more of it at michaelflemingmusic.com. Michael also composed the brilliant music throughout Ransom 79. You'll find me on social platforms as Ross Whitaker TV, and of course, thanks to you for listening.